And yeah, have a fantastic day. And on to our first amazing keynote. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for the warm welcome. This morning, I'm going to talk about the so-called organizational drag. And what the antidote to it is, and how the antidote is about unlocking this fast flow machine that we talked about. A word of warning, we have 171 slides, and Ethan's left us half an hour rather than 40 minutes. So make yourselves comfortable. Hope you have enough coffee. Can't see much coffee in your hands, but you're in for a journey. I was looking on the train into Manchester this morning. I was looking at the schedule. It looks amazing, but this is probably what it's going to feel like. This is our slot. Then we might need a little bit of the next slot. We might need a bit of the lunchtime, but if you need to go and get lunch, we won't be offended. And then just a couple of more slots, and we should be. I think Ethan's got like some notes at the end. You're happy for you to take that slot, but then if you want to stay a bit longer and kind of not get the drinks, we're still going to be here giving this talk. So some introductions. This is Andy, Director of Engineering at Flipdish, and I'm Toli. I'm Principal Engineer at Flipdish. And I guess the question, do you ever get the feeling that you're seeing patterns emerge, practice that you want to share, things like that? And then you find someone, you're like, you see these patterns as well, that's great. I met Andy at Cinch, and this is our highlight. Dr. Werner Vogels was on stage in Las Vegas talking about Cinch's architecture as a kind of exemplar of event-driven architectures. So that's where we met. And a few companies between us, we're wondering, well, it can't just be us kind of seeing this. It must be more than other people, more than us. So we packaged all these patterns and things that we saw as this concept of a fast flow machine. And this has 3 phases. It's got the wiring, the deploying, and the sustaining. So we start from the wiring. This is an important piece to start from before you get into anything else. The way I look at our job as engineering leaders a lot of the time is we're pulling this really heavy box towards one direction. But there's always this sense of friction that makes everything really, 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 really slow. And it's not bad for your back, it's not bad for your knee, it's not bad for your mental health, and there must be a better way. And the way I look at it is there's some friction points, and there's some signals that we all see, and just see if you can resonate with these. There's 3 things that we highlight that we've seen time and time again at various companies. Number 1, you give a team an outcome, you never hear from them in the next 6 months. They disappear in a black hole. There's no knowledge of what's happening. Why is nothing happening? Is there anything happening? You don't know. The next one, you've got 4 teams. They all work in their individual silos. These are actual silos, by the way, and they don't communicate with each other. They don't learn from each other. So the outcome is not there for the organization. It's really slow. It becomes even slower when the software becomes too much to handle for the teams that you have. The team cognitive load explodes, and before you know it, everything kind of halts to a stop. Like the entire organization is in this situation of drag. Hopefully, I saw some people nodding. I don't know if you're nodding for the signals, but hopefully internally you're saying, oh yeah, I've seen that before. That's very, very familiar. So I want to say congratulations for being here, because you've got the self-awareness that you need to learn, and from your kind of co-practitioners. So I want everyone to give you a round of applause to each other for being here. Good job. The first step. Welcome to organizational group therapy, which is often how this feels like. So all the stuff that we talk about is centered on this concept of flow. Flow is probably the answer to most of your questions. What do we mean by flow? It's the value stream. It's the flow of the value stream. It's all the sequence of activities that an organization performs to deliver value to a customer. From the user research, UX design, all the way to ship support, analytics, and when you have incidents, by the way. The whole bit. And what do we mean by a fast flow machine? Well, we define it as a structured system or culture designed to accelerate the flow of value. It's as simple as that. But we're going to try and unpack that a little bit today. So this is it. We start from laying out the foundations. Then we go into enacting the change that we want to see. And then we don't go in, make changes, and just leave. There's a joke somewhere there about consultants, but we want to build a continuous culture. But where to start from? This is the question. And our observation is that you need to start from where you are, because you can worry about better later, like the ideal can come later. But the question is, how do you know where you are? And that's a critical thing that you need to start with. And Andy will take you through what that means.
Thank you. You hear me okay? Excellent. So I want to talk a little bit about situational awareness and find our feet in the organization. Okay, so to do that, we're going to have to go on a bit of an adventure. Okay, we're going to have to go on tour. So there's 4 things I want to talk about when it comes to finding your feet and getting situational awareness. And the first one is Gemba. Anyone familiar with the term Gemba? Nobody? Excellent, that's great. So Gemba is a Japanese word. It means the real place. It's where work actually happens. So it comes from Toyota, kind of in the 1950s, and it basically means you go and see the thing happening. You don't just make a bunch of decisions in the C-suite and then you expect everyone to follow suit. Taiichi Ohno, who's kind of leading Toyota post-war, said, go see, ask why, and show respect. Okay, and that's exactly what we suggest everyone in this room does when you're trying to change something. So between us, we've worked at a few different organisations. So when I was at Foot Asylum, we used to work right next to the Arndale. So we'd make a change, we could go and see it in the Arndale in front of the tills. But we could also see how people were interacting with things. How are they using the loyalty? How are they finding the in-store process? When we worked at Cinch, we could go and see the cars being processed through, all the way into them being processed out. And where we are now at Flipdish, this is our head of people, Maura, and she's working in a Mexican restaurant for 2 days as part of her onboarding. And everyone has to do this. And they go through and they learn about how our customers are actually using things. Maybe some of them actually get to serve drinks or whatever as well. So there's a real opportunity to get that fast feedback loop. So the second thing is Wardley mapping. Is anyone familiar with the term Wardley mapping? Great, a few people. Excellent. So Wardley mapping is a concept by Simon Wardley. It's kind of a technique. And it basically helps us to answer 3 questions. Kind of what are our organizational capabilities? Are they a constraint or a competitive advantage? And ultimately, what can we afford not to do? So everyone in this room now works for Cloud Genius. We're an online platform that does AWS training, okay? Any resemblance to any real companies is purely coincidental. And so we're going to Wardley map this and hopefully gives you an idea around situational awareness and why it's so important. So good situational awareness starts with a user and their need, okay? So we've got some engineers, and their need is knowledge on demand, okay? For that to be true, we've got some other things that need to happen, okay? You need a website, you need a search engine, a content library, and things like subscription and billing, okay? Is everyone with me so far? Cool. And for that to be true, there's some even more underlying things that the customer probably won't see. Hopefully, customers don't know that you've got stuff on-prem, don't tell anyone, and also you're using Stripe for billing, okay? So we've got a very clear, this is a value chain. This isn't Wardley mapping, this is just a value chain, okay? So we've got a need. We've got, for that need to be true, some things that need to happen, these dependencies I talked about, yeah? All good? Cool. So this is where Wardley mapping comes in and situational awareness really start to take hold, because for each of these components, we can start to ask this very simple question. Do we build it or do we buy it, okay? For each one, is it experimental? So is it something that we're just running with and doing as a little group, or is it something that everybody does and it's a commodity? And does it give us a competitive advantage, or is everyone doing it? If we spend all our time on authorization, authentication, but we're not Okta, we're probably doing something wrong, okay? Focus on the things that make you unique. So what we can do is then bring this into Wardley mapping, okay? So this is essentially a Wardley mapping canvas. Okay, we've got the value chain from visible to invisible on the left-hand side, and then across we've got these 4 boxes. So Genesis, custom built, product, and commodity, okay? And depending on where that component lives, it enables us to reason about stuff, okay? So let's bring in our value chain, okay? I've added a couple of extra points. So we've got our user accounts need a custom auth server that only Bob knows how to change. Okay, we built our own authentication authorization, why wouldn't you? And a few other things like video hosting. So what we can do now is some very interesting things, because we can start to figure out where these things live based on, is it competitive advantage or the cost of doing business? Is it driven by guts or driven by metrics? Do we build the stuff on the left? Do we buy the things on the right? And we can arrange them in this neat order. So now we can start to reason about our systems, okay? But ultimately, the real great thing about Wardley mapping is we can start to build strategy. So let's say we have our custom auth server, but we actually want to migrate that to Auth0. We have our on-prem hosting that we actually want to move to S3 and move the video to Vimeo, okay? We're starting to build a strategy, in front of our very eyes now. And crucially, we can see where there's going to be inertia. So if we're moving from on-prem hosting to AWS, there's some things that might be a bit of a problem. Have you got the right people in the right roles? Have you got the right capabilities? So Wardley mapping allows us to see the future, okay? And by mapping the evolution of components, as we've already seen, we can anticipate change and kind of spot inertia and where there's going to be problems, and then shape our strategy before the future actually arrives. So Wardley mapping it's free. There's a whole book by Simon Wardley online. It's a great way to understand where you are and where you want to get to, and ultimately answer this question, which is, what can we afford not to do? What do we evolve? Auth 0. We want to move, there's no point in us spending our time building our own auth server if somebody does it way better and your focus is actually about enabling engineers to view, and learn about AWS. And you can figure out where it's going to be painful, moving to AWS, moving to serverless. If you don't have the right people in the right roles, there's going to be problems, and maybe that's where you do your training and bringing people to conferences as well to learn. So once we've figured out where our situational awareness is, we need to start thinking about capabilities in our organization and what are the capabilities that are going to get us to the future that we want to see, okay? So when I mean capabilities, think of skills, okay? So as soon as you start codifying these capabilities and you say, we're going to be serverless, we're going to do all these amazing things, what happens is danger, okay? Because you're telling people, you don't know how to do this thing, and we're going to have to bring someone in who does, which causes problems, okay? The way to frame this is really to actually say, create a shared understanding, okay? What are the capabilities that we think are important? Turn those capabilities into a framework, map where we currently are against our baseline, and bring people along. You cannot lose if you have Miro and you bring people into conversations early on. So how do you measure a skill or a capability? How do you actually figure out where people are and how people get better? So there's something called the Dreyfus model of skills acquisition. So it basically says that for anybody with a particular skill, they're going to be one of these 5 layers. They're going to be a novice, an advanced beginner, competent, proficient, expert, okay? And for any skill, when they're starting off, they think about rules. If anyone in this room has maybe been a Scrum Master or started off as an engineer or a data engineer, you probably refer to a book or, if the Scrum Guide says we need to have a stand-up every day at 9:30, all those kind of things. But over time, you realize that intuition is more important. The skills you've built up over your career and those experiences are really shaping how you work, okay? There's a really good talk by Lisa Crispin on this to go into more detail. But where it becomes super important for this talk is when we take a capability, say tech stack, okay? And we start to use the Dreyfus model to work out we've got 5 different kind of levels from beginner to an expert. And what we do is we decide what are these skills that are really going to get us to the future? Well, those key capabilities. So we make a list of them here, and we all agree this is what it looks like. We then bring in those different skills and talk through them, and we've got the different levels. And then we work out for an individual. This is an individual, okay? This is where they currently are. They're at Teach for a couple of things, but unfortunately, the accessibility stuff, they don't really know too much about it. So we've got some targeted learning opportunities there. And it scales. We can do it at a team level, so everybody in the team can figure out who's good at this thing and who's not, and then figure out how we pair people up to get better. And it scales even further as well to an organizational level. We do this to everybody. We understand all our capabilities now, and we probably find out that we're probably quite bad at security. It's always security, right, at the end of the day. But it gives us somewhere to start now, and it's based in situational awareness. We're not making this up. We're going through the motions of actually figuring and mapping things out. And we can take it a step further, okay? So let's say we've mapped this out onto a very lovely tech radar. We can start to actually align our capabilities with what we need as an organization, and Greg will remember this very well. So what we can do is look at our move to AWS and say, well, actually, some of our teams don't have any experience in AWS, so we're going to have targeted help there to really help them, whether it's consultancies, whether it's enabling teams. So when we start to chart a path and we say, well, actually, we want people to get better in our organization at these things. So, for example, our tech stack, if we want people to get better at TypeScript, for example, probably the way to do that is learning on the job. For the most part, you learn by doing when it comes to engineering. So we want to move that by having people learn. For things like writing code, it's probably deliberate practice. If you want people to get better at TDD, you get people to do improvement carters and do a coding thing as a group. Maybe on a Tuesday morning, you'll spend an hour going through an example online. For things like system design and maybe EDA, having an enabling team in your organization that can go around and enable people to get better at AWS is a good way of doing things. We can move things that way. And then we can use working groups to maybe get better at contract testing. We have a small, spun-up group who go away and figure out what contract testing looks like, spend 2 weeks figuring it out, and the end result is that we know what we're doing now. And we can even shape this, so we can even say the shape of a tech lead is actually this. This is what we mean by tech lead at our organization. So we're using situational awareness to drive improvements, drive our capabilities, and ultimately drive what the future of our organization looks like and who those people are. So the final thing around kind of being on tour, I mean, how many people in this room kind of report into like the C-suite, sort of CEO, CTO, CIO, or VPs and things like that, a few people? Does anyone have these kind of messages? Who are all these people and what are they working on? And most importantly, when will it be done? Okay, this is this is what they currently ask. And the reason they're asking this is because they don't have situational awareness either. So 2 tips. Okay, don't tell anyone, by the way. I know it's being recorded, but ask your CEO what they are frustrated by. It sounds really simple, but how many people actually go, what is it you are trying to do? What is it you are optimizing for? And what are you not getting? Okay. And this is a really good tip, I'd say, is find 3 things your CEO is bad at and get good at them. Every CEO isn't going to be great at everything. You can fill in some of those gaps and help them to get situational awareness. So hopefully you get fewer messages like these of, I need metrics, and can we not get some 10x developers and assign the work to them, okay? And the way to do this is to become information radiators, okay? Terrible pun, I'm sorry. So do you trust us yet, me and Tolly? Just a quick, anybody trust us? A few people, okay, a few people, great. So if you trust us that blogging is the way forward, and I mean that in 2 ways. Internal blogging in your organization, and also there's a tool called blogging that makes it super easy for engineers to get up, and not even engineers, anyone in an organization, to start writing and writing things down. Because really, organizations have a memory, okay? And you also have to be wary that people have probably tried this thing before. Digital transformation is ongoing, and it goes in those kind of 3 or 4 year cycles of a new CTO comes in, tries to change the world. After 3 years, the Slack gets deactivated. The new CTO comes in, okay? So you have to be wary that these things happen, and you're probably not the first person. So start to write down what you are doing, okay? And the reason is that organization memory is a sliding window. And if you join, there's probably a bunch of things that happened before you. But if you can't see these things because you weren't there and nobody wrote it down, how do you know what the right action is? And how do you not just do what everyone else did 3 years ago that's been lost to time? So you need to start writing things down. And a really crucial part of this is creating an operating system. Okay? An operating system is a set of norms and actions that are shared with everyone in a company. It's a great book by Claire Hughes Johnson. She was the chief operating officer of Stripe when they went from, I think, about 200 people to 8,000. So she knows how to scale companies, okay? So ultimately, you need to save your organization's memory to an operating system. And hand over to Tolly to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so an operating system, I'll come over here as well. Operating system is a great analogy. Obviously, we're in a tech conference, so we'd expect to have those type of analogies, but it's about writing things down and about kind of saving that memory into kind of more of a hard disk thing where it consists of an operating model, a golden path, a platform, or things like target architecture or ADRs. So I'll go through these one by one. So just using Wikipedia on this, an operating model is an abstract and visual representation of how the organization delivers value, but also how it runs itself. And that's purely the definition in Wikipedia. But the way we see it, and we've applied it to 2 different companies, is principles are sort of the sensible defaults and not the absolutes, and practices are what you do daily to get better, the things that you use to build quality software products. Examples are always link efforts back to user need, or radiate information, someone will care, or even kind of how you approach architecture, which is start with a minimal viable architecture. These might sound surprising, but if you write them down and say, this is how we think about things, that makes a big difference. People start referencing them when they make decisions. Practices are things like observability-driven development. No shock for those of you who know me that I would put that on there. Test-driven development is another one, but blogging, as Andy said, we need to start writing so that we can, writing is thinking and all that stuff. And CI/CD is something that's not going away. We're at a DevOps conference. That's a given, but we need to write it down. Second one is golden path. That might be a contentious matter. Some people say, oh, we don't want to be restricting our engineers or our teams. Some people don't want to be restricted. But in our experience, it does really help a lot to actually say, right, this is the way we're going to build systems, and this is how we're going to support you to build these systems. You can build them out of this, but you won't have the kind of high-level support that you'll have with the golden path. And write it down. Things like TypeScript or a flip to we have TypeScript, event-driven architectures, those things are part of the golden path. We're writing it down. We're building templates for it. We're building all sorts of support for it. And talking about support, you can't just say, here's the operating model, here's the golden path, go get it. You need to support people. You need to give them an offer they can't refuse. Otherwise, they'll likely say, no, I'm going to do what I know to do. That's my professional pride. So you need to start building an enabling platform. And my best advice for building an enabling platform is start by holding hands. That's where you learn. As an enabler, you will learn. As a person who's been enabled, you will learn as well. So what you've learned, you can then start writing down in a wiki. Famously, Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton, in their book, Team Topologies, have kind of popularized this idea that a platform can just be a wiki. Just write it down in a wiki. That's all you need as a platform sometimes. And that's the first good step. Then once you've got the holding hands and the wiki, then you can start building the actual platform. In this case, for us, it was like a set of AWS accounts with pre-configured settings and all that stuff that allows teams to deploy their workloads into AWS. But it was in that order, not sort of starting from the top. You can also write down design guides. There's so many good knowledge out there, especially for APIs, maybe a bit less for events that you could use. Cloud Events is a standard that you could use. Stripe has been building amazing APIs for years. Use what they've learned, but then build something on top of it that's a bit more custom to you. But write it down. Make it known to the teams that this is what you're doing. There's a strange thing that happens, and I made a bit of a cheap joke about consultants earlier. But actually, it's a strange thing that happens that when you join a company, people don't trust you inherently. So you have to bring out outside experts, whether they're consultants or whether they're people who work for AWS, or people who just are passionate about and kind of deep experts on what they do, whether it's Microphone Ends with Luca or James or Dave can talk about event-driven architectures all day. Bring them in, reach out to them, even if they're not in your network, they'll reply to your message. They will want to come and help you. In absence of that, there's loads of really good knowledge out there from people who have done this before. Ask yourself, are you the only company who's dealing with this problem? It's highly likely that the answer is no. So then the next question is, where can I learn? So Sheen, who's in the room, has got the keynote tomorrow. They did some amazing stuff with Lego.com. Go and watch that video with your team and learn what they learned. Fourth thing is target architecture. So this is a really weird one for me because it's really hard to say, well, go for this. You have an orders team, a payments team, a loyalty team, and then they look after their services. It's perfect. You can't go wrong. But that's ideal, right? That's something to strive to. That's a vision. That's good to write down, it's good to articulate, and it's good to set that goal. But then, as Simon Wardley says, who's kind of come up with the Wardley mapping stuff, cross the river by feeling the stones. It's important that you don't kind of prepare everything ahead of time and try and make that massive leap over the river and hope that you'll end up on the other side. You won't, most likely. So start by kind of feeling the stones, making sure that you're stable and getting that short feedback loop. And one way to do that is through architecture decision records. So be very explicit in what decisions you're making. The way I see it, if you ignore all the meetings that you might have in your calendar, what a typical engineer does or a typical team does is they either write code or they make decisions. They make decisions every day, every week. Write them down because it doesn't have to be an exhaustive thing. It doesn't have to be, I've thought about all the alternatives in the world, I've watched all the videos, read all the documentation. It can be something really, really lightweight and short, which is status, context, decision, and some consequences. Because writing is thinking, and you're also building that institutional memory, because when Andy comes in, you can say, Andy, go and read all the ADRs. You'll understand why we made these decisions. And they're not only strictly architectural. They're things like, what test runner did we use? What's our deployment strategy? So when someone asks, why we decided to do it this way? Well, here we go. This is the context. This is the rationale. You can judge that, but that's the decision that we made, and we can move forward with that. But you might wonder at this point, we've only talked about wiring the machine, which is the first stage. That's a lot of stuff to do before we kind of do any change. So why bother with all this? What happens if we don't, is a natural question you might have in your head. This is the mental model I have in my head. You join a company, you've got one team who says containers and Python is the future. With Gen AI, with data engineering, that's the way to do things. You've got another team that says, okay, I understand that monoliths are a problem, but just hear me out. Monoliths can work if you just optimize them. they can be better as well. They have their good things. And then you've got this rogue team in the corner saying, oh, we believe in serverless, and serverless is amazing. That, you can see how that takes you in so many different directions, and there's no coherent single direction you're going through. Another mental model I have is, this is a great film, by the way, if anyone's not watched it. It's all about kind of all the different emotions a team might have, or individual might have, which come with anger, disgust about not writing tests, fear of not breaking production, sadness for kind of not knowing all this stuff that Andy's come in and talked about in the Golden Path. And then you've got your tech lead who says, oh, work is joy, we can do this, believe me. So that's what happens. And that's fair. So you need to start from somewhere. And this is where we start talking about deploying the machine. So when you deploy the machine, that starting point is the difficult part. Because there's this concept of cold start in serverless, which is that you have a full cold start, which is, if you take the analogy of an organization, Andy and I are doing all this wiring and kind of setting up the organization for success, but the more we spend on that, the less, the larger this red orthogonal thing is. It'll take a long time before we even have a partial cold start, which is the first team picks it up and starts implementing some of these things. When the first team picks this up, then the second team and the third team have more of a warm start because of that, they have that enabling platform that I talked about earlier. So you want to minimize this full cold start where appropriate. And coming back to the Wadley map, you want to start from the pioneers. Pick a team that is courageous and wants to learn and can implement some of these things. And then with your second wave, you can get the settlers who are actually brilliant at coming up with patterns. You don't need to come up with all the patterns ahead of time. They can figure it out for you. But the first one is the important one. You've also got the platform team, the town planners, who are thinking ahead and saying, oh, I think these teams will need this platform to build things, these AWS accounts, all this stuff. So think about really, really carefully what teams you pick. But I made a cheap joke about consultants earlier, but we had at Cinch consultants who came in and said, okay, you've got all this stuff, but have you written any code? We're like, no. Okay, start writing code. But remember, this code will be an exemplar. And again, people who've done it before, or consultants, might say, if you're worried about how to do things, we can tell you how to do things. We've seen it before. So lean into them where you can. And think about it in terms of a walking skeleton. There's loads of things you can do to actually get something done. But there's only the green stuff that you need to do to get something to the minimal thing that you can do. So focus on that. Focus on the thing that goes from AWS account setup to you've saved something, a hello world in S3 that you can browse to. And then you can do the other stuff after that. And this is a real example we had at Cinch, where within a few weeks we went from inventory to search to delivering a car to your home. But remember, with all of this, the biggest force for good is not the tech that you choose, it's the people. And that's why we are here talking about deploying the machine. So with that, I'll give you to Andy to talk about people.
Thank you. All right, so there's a great term from GDS. I don't know if people have seen this poster. It says the unit of delivery is the team. It means the team is the one that should be the minimal unit of delivery, okay? You don't give work to individuals, you give work to a team and they reach an outcome. Has anyone read this book? Cool, a few people. This might trigger a few people. So it's called The Phoenix Project, okay? And in this book, it's about organizational transformation, okay? And the perils and problems of trying to get a team and an organization to change how they work. And the reason is because there's people like this. Does anyone know who this is? Can I remember the name of this person? Brent, excellent, gold star. So Brent is the person who is the only one who knows how things work. He's the only person that can be on call. He's the only person that solves and saves the day every time there's a problem, okay? So what we need to do is a bit of de-Brentification in our organizations if we're going to do a transformation. We need to reduce the reliance on a single person, okay? And we need to start something called diffusing the knowledge and the tasks and the responsibilities across the organization, okay? We need to have everybody bought in and reduce these single points of failure. And if you are struggling right now to find the Brent in your organization, in your team, maybe it's you. Maybe you are Brent, okay? So let's figure this out, okay? So are you Brent? Let's work through this, okay? Everything flows through you. You're consultant for every major decision, deployment, incident. Trust no one, not even yourself, okay? You're constantly firefighting. You're the one who has to solve that urgent problem and save the day. It's up to you. No one else could do it, only you. You've got no time to delegate. You're too busy to offload tasks, okay? Time is money, and money doesn't grow on trees or whatever. Like, or, you knew everything because you were the first engineer at the company. You know how it works. You know how to fix it, so you might be the bottleneck, okay? But there's an antidote to this, okay? Capture knowledge, share that wealth, cross-train your team, standardize and automate when appropriate, okay? Delegate, distribute ownership and leadership. Build that culture of collaboration. Instead of going away and writing something up and saying, can everyone look at my spreadsheet or my slides? Say, let's hop on Miro and figure out where I am and where you are and work backwards to you knowing what I know, okay? And then monitor and adjust it. And create agents of change in your organization. Because it's dangerous to go alone, okay? You need to take people along with you. You need help. You need teams. You may need to have some architects that you can bring in as an enabling function, staff plus engineers, and maybe working groups to help you. Okay? You don't have to go alone when you're deep identifying your organization. You can have staff plus people who will help you to adopt things like event storming as a standard. Okay? You've got architects that can maybe help you to understand EDA and how to create exemplars, and working groups. There's a great talk by Varuna Venkatesh who talks about how to create these enabling groups of people, these short-lived teams that work for a certain amount of time, solve a problem, and move on. Okay? So that's deploying this machine, but then sustaining it as well. Sustaining the machine, how do we keep this going so it's not a one-time thing? There's a few things we need to talk about, okay? All machines need tuning, okay? And there's a word for it, Kaizen. Is anyone familiar with this term? Okay, great, a few people. So it's a Japanese word, and it basically means improvement or change for the better, okay? And it's from Toyota Production System. But it's this person that is crucial to knowing anything about improvements. So this is W. Edwards Deming. So post-war Japan was obviously devastated. And they brought someone in from America, Demings, to help them to get better and improve. And he's basically told Japan, in order to become, back to where they were, they needed to focus on quality. It wasn't about volume, it's about quality. Bake quality in at every stage. Quality as strategy was his motto. And it's everything that you see in DevOps and anything you'll hear over the next couple of days about continuous improvement, feedback loops, systems thinking, it's pure Deming, okay? It's constantly about finding better ways. And this is how he turned Toyota around from being one of the worst performing companies to actually being one of the best in the world. So Kaizen's about slowing things down, okay? Creating the conditions for learning. You need Slack in your system for improvement work. 100% optimized motorway is a car park, okay? You need Slack so teams can grow and learn, and so that the system is safer to work within. So he said that everybody needs to be involved. If we're going to sustain this machine, we need a philosophy of improvement. So in order to build that, we need to look at what are our things that we can improve in our organization, our DevOps practice, observability, value stream mapping. There's probably 100 things in an organization we could get better at. And the way to do that, and this is something that we saw at Cinch, saw at Prolific, we're seeing it now at Flipdish, is figuring out how to create an improvement cart, an improvement theme, okay? We have a problem right now, we have a target condition a few weeks away, the definition of brilliant, and then the first steps, the next best action, okay? So an example of what we did at Cinch was a DevOps checkpoint, where every team would go through this stage to get better at what they do. And there's 4 stages to it, okay? We find an agreement of what good looks like, so we use the DORA online check, teams put in the metrics, and teams worked out where they were, okay? And then they look at where they are and where they are in relation to the standard on the website. So for where a lot of our teams were, it was things about monitoring observability is probably where they needed to focus their efforts on next. So each team would go through and figure out how can we get better at our observability. And then they would take those 3 to 5 things and put it into the next cycle of work. And they would do it on a cycle. Every few months they'd run this DevOps checkpoint, make it regular, record the results and compare. And this isn't comparing teams. You do not want to compare teams. You want to compare one team over time to see if they're getting better. Another example, what's alarming you? So this is 4 simple steps to not getting woken up at 3 a.m. Get a team to draw out their architecture, tell you what happens when things go on fire, figure out the severity of all of those things. If this thing's on fire, what happens and how do we know about it? If it goes wrong, how do we know? And start to map out how we can get better. So there's 4 steps. Start with this agreed measure of what good looks like. Look at where the team is in relation to a standard. Look at your current state. What do we want to change? And then pick those things that you can improve over your next cycle of work or your next sprint. So now we need to close this loop, okay? I'm going to hand back to Toli now.
Right, so this is the last bit. We're actually closed the loop here, in case anyone noticed. So closing the loop starts with feedback loops. And one thing that I've seen a lot as an anti-pattern, and I've fallen into that myself, is the first thing I reach out to is I can build the DORA dashboard, those 4 metrics that became really popular. But our experience has taught us that we don't need just a DORA dashboard. What we do need is signals, but not metrics. So we define signals as events that allow you to interpret roughly the effect of what you've done with your wiring and deploying, whereas metrics are quantitative measurements that act as a proxy of the effect. So metrics are a bit harder to do well, and signals are kind of low barrier for entry, and you can get a view of how well you're doing. Because bad metrics judge, good metrics track, but great metrics start a conversation, so you can see signals as that. As Andy mentioned already, don't use metrics to compare teams because that's not the point. You want the team to get better, not the team to get better than another team. You can also send a message and say, hey, how's it going with this API design guide? Just give me some feedback. I just want to understand how you're finding, how your team is finding, and things like that. If you want to get a step further, you can do some qualitative data, especially if your organization is a bit bigger. I'd recommend looking at DevEx, which is doing some great work in this space around building out these kind of questionnaires and how to understand how your teams are doing from a developer experience perspective. And I think Nicole Forsgren was involved in that, who wrote Accelerate. So go in this order: Slack messages, questionnaires, and metrics from top to bottom. So don't start with metrics straight away or questionnaires, because they're really hard to do. And finally, to sustain the machine, you do need continuous evolution. And I'll go back to the analogy of feeling the stones as you cross the river. Don't do a waterfall thing where you pick up, you predict what you need to do, you do everything, you prepare all the stuff, and then you make that giant leap across the river. You need to try and continuously evolve and try and continuously think, does this work for us? If you thought it was a great idea, but it doesn't work, just drop it and try the next thing. So in summary, the fast flow machine is all about wiring the machine, deploying the machine, and sustaining the machine. It's about creating the foundations. It's about enacting the change we want to see, but it's also sustaining, building a continuous culture by sustaining that machine. If you take anything away, is think big, but then start small, and you will scale fast if you kind of take those iterative steps. And as a last thing, I'd say choose fast flow. Choose intent. Choose writing ADRs. Choose to remember the why. Choose a way. Choose a set of principles. Maybe choose a set of practices. Choose to codify your intent over stories. Choose facts over folklore. Choose a golden path. Choose an API design guide your teams will follow. Choose an architectural approach. Choose a programming language, because it's okay to learn another one. Choose to start somewhere. Choose to rely on signals over metrics. Choose your future, and choose fast flow. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? One question. Glad to hear.
Can you recommend a good consultant?
You don't want me to say that name, do you? Any questions? One over here.
I didn't really think it through. So I guess loved it. Great. Found a lot of references to things that we're trying or things that we failed when trying. So that's amazing. It's great to get some confirmation that some of the things that we're doing are the things that you talked about. But I guess the challenge that we're having is in a scaling startup with very low budget or tight budget to try and do all of this when you're a small team that is doing the SRE, the security, the infrastructure, and then trying to get into that, the platform engineering stuff and the DevEx stuff. It's quite challenging.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, how do we do this when we don't have enough people, really? So I guess we've been in those situations a lot, and you don't. I think that wiring the machine bit gives the illusion that we do all of that stuff for one company. We don't. We do bits of that, and the key thing for me is we look at the constraint. What's stopping us from going to the next step? What's stopping us to build our product? And we start from there and then start backwards. You don't need to boil the ocean. I think that's the big thing. I think we had some slides in there where we were saying that previously, but we would be here till this afternoon. But I think for me, I think it was the rule of 63. I think that's it.
Yeah, there's a great blog post by Dan North, and he says when you join an organization or you're in an organization, there's probably 63 things that you want to fix. So just focus on 3 and leave the 60. Like focus on the 3 most important. I think I'd add to that as well, like when you in a scaling organization, there's a lot of things to do. I wouldn't start with the names of the techniques, like start with the outcome. Like don't call it worldly mapping, call it we're going to model our value chain as an organization, bring it back to the organization as it currently stands and the things you want to improve. So I think if you start to bring in lots of terms like worldly mapping and team topologies and this and that, people kind of get worried and feel like it's a ton of work when actually the outcome is probably the benefit to the people who you need buy-in from. So I would never use the names of these things. Give it a name that they know about, right?
Thanks. That was a great question. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.